I found it at the bottom of a metal box that smelled of old rain and cedar wood. A photograph. Black and white, its edges soft like grains of ash. A village square. A well at its center. A line of people waiting, balancing clay jars on their heads. And there, at the far left edge of the frame, standing just outside the line, a woman. Her back was turned. Her dress was dark. Her hand was raised, mid-motion, towards something beyond the edge of the picture. And the hand was moving, not shaking, not blurred dot moving, as if the photograph had not yet decided to settle. Maryam, the old woman who found it, placed the photograph on the table. She stared at it for a long time. The oil lamp beside her cast long shadows across the wall. Outside, the village had fallen into deep sleep. The goats had stopped their murmuring. Even the wind had gone still. Yet the hand inside the picture slowly reached outward, as though calling to something that had already gone. Maryam had lived 71 years in this valley. She had buried her husband, outlived the children, and watched 3 waves of drought sweep away what little the land had left to give. She was not a woman who frightened easily. But that night, she could not bring herself to extinguish the lamp. She sat with the photograph until dawn slipped through the window like a pale apology. The box had been there for decades. It had been left behind by a family that fled the valley long ago. No one remembered their names anymore, only that they left suddenly, in the middle of summer. Without telling anyone why, the box passed from hand to hand the way unwanted things do, quietly, without ceremony, until it came to Maryam when she was paid for her weaving with whatever the buyer had instead of money. She had never opened it before. There had always been more to worry about tomorrow than yesterday. But now she looked at the photograph, and something old inside her began to ache. Not fear exactly, but the feeling of standing at the edge of a field you had passed your entire life without entering. A field that had always been there, waiting, not impatiently, but with a patience that somehow embarrassed you. She showed it to her neighbor Yusuf the next day. He was a practical man who repaired tools, counted things carefully, and trusted only what could be measured. He held the photograph at arm's length, tilted it toward the light, then turned it sideways and laid it flat against a stone wall. He said nothing for a moment. Then he handed it back without looking at it again and said he had work to do. But Maryam noticed he never looked at it again. And she noticed, in the following days, that he began leaving his door slightly open in the evenings, something he had never done before, as if he were listening for something. As if the photograph had planted a question inside him that he refused to name but could not stop hearing. The younger people laughed when they heard about it. Of course they laughed. They carried phones with bright screens now, voices traveling through wires from distant cities, and the world had become small enough to fit inside a pocket. Why would a hand in an old photograph mean anything? Why should something so old still matter? But Maryam noticed that the loudest laughers were the ones who returned after sunset to see it. They held the photograph carelessly, as if holding something they pretended not to care about. And one by one, they set it down with surprising gentleness. Each of them stayed silent longer than necessary, because the movement of that hand carried something that did not belong to paper. Something that asked a question no laughter could hide. The girl who helped Maryam with her weaving, a quiet child named Safiya whose father had left the valley to find work and never returned, sat with the photograph for nearly an hour. She did not laugh. She did not ask questions. She simply looked at the woman standing with her back turned and her arm extended. At some moment during that silent watching, Safiya's eyes filled, not with tears that fell, but with tears that didn't. Maryam watched her and understood something she herself could not easily say aloud. That grief also reaches outward. That the people we lose stand at the edges of frames we cannot widen, their arms stretched towards something we cannot follow. And perhaps the hardest part is not that they left, but that they were moving when they did. They were in the middle of something. The sentence never finished. The hand never settled. A traveling merchant passed through the valley a week later and heard about the photograph. He offered Maryam money for it, a fair amount, even more than fair. She refused without discussion. He offered more. She shook her head. He said it was foolishness. She did not answer. He left before noon, and the dust behind his cart settled quickly, the way dust always settles over things that were never important to him. At night, Maryam began thinking about the woman in the photograph. Not with obsession, and not with the excitement of someone trying to solve a mystery, but with the quiet persistence of someone tending a small fire. She tried to imagine what the woman had been reaching for. Perhaps a child who had run ahead. Perhaps a piece of cloth caught in the wind. Perhaps another hand reaching from someone standing just outside the frame. Each possibility opened a small world of its own, a world that contained an entire life. Perhaps that is what we forget about old things. They do not belong only to the past. They are filled with paths still being walked. The past does not become still. It stretches forward, like a river that does not know it has already passed the stone. The photograph remained on Miriam's table. She did not hang it on the wall. She did not hide it again. She simply allowed it to remain present, the way an old elder sits quietly in a room, not always speaking, yet changing the atmosphere simply by being there. Seasons passed. Rain came and went. Some young people left the valley and returned. Others never did. Sophia's father eventually sent a letter. He was alive, far away, poor, and tired. Sophia read the letter without expression, folded it carefully, and placed it somewhere Miriam could not see. But that evening she stayed longer than usual. And when she finally left, she paused at the door and looked once more at the photograph, as if checking whether the hand had moved farther, as if wanting to believe that reaching, even without touching, might still be a kind of answer. And Miriam, alone again in the lamp's soft light, looked at the photograph and thought of all the hands that had reached toward her, all the movements that never finished, all the goodbyes that were never truly goodbye. The hand in the photograph was still moving. Perhaps it had always been so. Perhaps she had simply never been quiet enough before to see it. Outside, the valley held its breath. The stars were very old and very distant, and they offered no explanations. They simply burned. They simply remained. And somewhere in the deep darkness between one heartbeat and the next, that was enough.